You want to start recording?
That's great. Okay. So thank you very much, John. This is the second part of the interview with John Christmas. John Christmas is the author of KGB Banker, co-authored with William Burton McCormick. Yes, and thank you very much, John, for showing us the book. And I am happily also announcing that the book is now also available at Agenda Bookshop and major stores around Malta of Agenda Bookshop. So you can also get a copy of the book from Agenda. So thank you, John. Last time it was a very interesting interview where we discussed your past experience at Parex Bank. We discussed your whistleblowing and how the story unfolded, then the bank collapsed, and other banks came out of Parex Bank, like ABLV and Citadel Bank. Yes, I'm sorry if I did not pronounce it correctly.
Yes, and Ukio, there were several of them.
Exactly.
There still are, some are still going, actually. And first, before we thank you, Mark, I look forward to this second interview. I was excited for our cooperation at Malta Book Festival. That was a big success. Happy to be on your Dar Camilleri website, available for sale, and now happy to be going into Agenda bookstores.
That's great. That's great. We're very excited about it. Thank you, John. And we're very happy to have you, as always. So, yes, so let's go back from where we left last time. Parex Bank collapsed, and we had the financial crisis in 2008, and other banks came out of Parex Bank. And the question I want to ask you is, what has changed since then in terms of regulation and how these banks operate? Because since 2008, the EU and the US both have engaged in a lot of legislation, a lot of regulation in the banking sector, in the world of finance, and regulation has increased. Yet still, we've seen the experience with ABLV, which continued money laundering practices with Russian money. It was then shut down eventually. So how do you see the world of Russian money laundering changing from those times, since when we had this new wave of legislation in the financial crisis?
Well, I mean, I see a big disappointment because I know there are a lot of new regulations, that there's all these new crackdowns. You know, if you try to transfer a couple thousand euros to your relative or something, that the bank needs to have a big investigation about this. If you're financing terrorism, if you send money to your grandmother or something. And yeah, it's a big bother for everybody in Europe now, because whenever you transfer money somewhere, just a normal transfer, you know, it becomes a big deal for the banks who need to investigate this. Now, if they would actually be using these laws to crack down on the oligarchs, that would be fine. But that seems like it's not really what's happening. They're just introducing a huge bureaucracy that wastes everybody's time. They have these doubling of, you know, it used to be each country just had a central bank, and then they split the central bank into a regulator and a central bank. So then there were two things. There was a regulator and a central bank. And now also all the countries have this FIAU, which is even like a tripling of the, you know, the regulatory burden, or the tripling of the expense to the government, that now they need to pay all the employees at the central bank and at the regulator and at the FIAU also. And when huge crimes occur anyway and nobody seems to do anything about it, it's quite a disappointment. With Latvia, I talk with journalists all the time about Latvia. They say that, you know, that they are aware that a lot of money laundering used to go on in Latvia, but they went to visit and they went to the FIAU and they show them that they have hundreds of people there who are studying all the suspicious activity reports, and they've been convinced that Latvia is really having a crackdown. But there's certain things where certain clues that are emerged that show that this is not true. I mean, there was one bribery thing that involved Parex Bank. This is started in 2002. It was I gave the information to the Latvian prosecutors and regulators in 2005. The United States gave information about the same bribery. This was about selling buses to Riga City. The United States gave the same information to the Latvian authorities in 2010. The bus company is located in Poland. The Polish government gave information to the Latvian government in 2018. This is all the same crime. So, you know, the Latvian government found out about it in 2005 and found out about it again in 2010 and found out about it again in 2018. I wouldn't be surprised if the bribery is still continuing now, because nobody's actually done anything about it. I mean, there were no prosecutions and they did nothing. And I get the impression that these hundreds of people in the Latvian government who are reading these suspicious activities, they must be told not to look at certain things. Like, okay, if there's 100,000 suspicious activity reports in Latvia in 1 year, they say, hey, look, why don't you look at all of these, but don't look at these? This is like, you know, a pile of them that you're not allowed to look at. So just look at these ones, but don't look at these other ones. But this is astonishing. I mean, for the European Union and for the United States to continue giving money to Latvia in a situation where Latvia is getting ripped off by this bus company from at least 2002 until 2018 with no prosecutions. You know, when the Latvian government is just giving money away to the criminals, I don't understand why the United States and the European Union need to, you know, continue to give them grants and loans and stuff. I mean, I would think that at least they need to have some kind of minimal amount of law enforcement. I mean, it's super embarrassing that they received the same information about the same crime 3 times and it still continues for 16 years and they, you know, don't prosecute anybody. I mean, this should be unacceptable for sure. But that's how it is with these FIAUs and with all these new regulations, is they appear not really to affect the billionaires. I mean, it appears that it makes an annoyance for all the normal people trying to make normal transfers, but for the billionaires, it seems like it has no effect on them.
So, if I get the impression right, it seems that despite all these new structures, all these new entities, the regulation, the laws, despite having all of this, it would be ineffective if you do not have the political will and you do not have the will of the political class to make these institutions and laws effective. So you can have all these laws and...
Oh, here, I'll give you I'll give you an amazing example. So when Parex Bank was looted and they covered the Latvian government, I was the whistleblower when it got looted. The government discredited me and covered up the whistleblowing at taxpayer expense by making a fake sale where they announced that they sold a stake in Parex Bank to the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development for some high price, which was supposed to prove that the bank had not been looted because the EBRD studied the assets and said the assets were good, which turned out not to be true. And then it turned out that the entire sale of the stake was not really true because the Latvian secretly paid the EBRD to buy that stake. So, I mean, a lot of people have, like, at first thought, difficulty following this, like the idea of paying somebody to take a stock rather than selling a stock for money. But yeah, if you have an institution which is bankrupt and you want to hide that it's bankrupt and you want to do that by convincing a famous investor to buy a stake in it, but the famous investor says, no way, I'm not going to invest in that because I can see that it's insolvent. But then you say, well, listen, we'll secretly give you the money to invest, and we'll also give you, you know, some extra money for your trouble. That's the kind of fraud that they did. Now, the Prime Minister of Latvia, who signed that, now is one of the top people in the European Commission. And one of the things the European Commission announced is that they're unifying the anti-money laundering system for all of the EU countries. And they're supposedly doing this to make the anti-money laundering better in Europe. But the person at the European Commission who was made responsible for that was the same guy who was the Latvian prime minister who signed this fake deal with the EBRD. He was getting called into other countries. I mean, I remember there was one time an announcement that Italy has a problem that some of the banks have a lot of bad debts and or bad loans in their portfolios. And they called him in to go down to Italy and give advice to the Italians what to do. I was wondering what his advice would be. Like the same thing he did in Latvia, like, well, what you should do is make some kind of like fake transactions, which make it look like the loans aren't really bad, even though they are bad. I mean, that's what he did in Latvia. But this really makes you wonder about the whole European Commission. I mean, do they not know that this guy has this track record of doing this huge fraud in Latvia? Or maybe they do know, and maybe all of them are corrupt, and maybe they picked him on purpose, because maybe if all of them are corrupt, maybe they want to have a corrupt person in a leadership position because he protects the rest of them. I mean, I'm not really sure. I still think it all should be exposed. Yeah, but that's where we are with the European Commission and with Europe's new unified anti-money laundering is, you know, they're wasting everybody's time. Like you transfer 1,000 euros to your grandma and they need to have an investigation of this, but still the billionaires are like running around, you know, with their luxury cars and their super yachts and their airplanes and flying around to their palaces, and they don't seem to be inconvenienced by this.
I'm a bit confused about the actual because I don't know much about it, so it would be good to explain to us. Because I'm a bit confused how the EBRD is regulated, because it's an international institution where the European Union has a stake, but it doesn't own it, and several other governments own this. It's like a very strange international organization, and international organizations are always hard to regulate because of jurisdiction issues. So can you explain to us how is it actually possible for the EBRD, such a big institution, to do such a fraud in the EU? Because I would assume that the European Central Bank would have some objections in this kind of activity, I would assume.
Well, yeah, it's you know, it makes you wonder about the entire financial system and legal system of all of Europe that this thing exists. So when the EBRD was created in 1991, when the Soviet Union broke up, the idea was, who was the socialist leader of France? Mitterrand?
Yes.
It was his idea. It was his idea to create it. And the idea was that all these countries were going to put in capital, and there was going to be this international development bank. There was some kind of, I guess, battle about where it was going to be located, because, you know, people figured it's going to bring a lot of jobs. So there were different cities that wanted to have it located in their city. It wound up being located in London. And one reason they picked London and the United Kingdom is because the United Kingdom agreed to let them operate in London with immunity from UK law. That's one thing. And exemption from UK taxes. So the employees of the EBRD who work in London get their salaries tax-free because, you know, supposedly this institution is working on fostering democracy, and they're like all altruists, and therefore they don't have to pay taxes. Now, they have a lot of secrecy to them, like they don't disclose how much they pay people. Another thing is they should disclose the consulting fees and donations they make. I've been told by journalists that one of the problems of getting the frauds of the EBRD into the media is they pay consulting fees to huge numbers of people, which I assume means journalists. So, you know, the way the Soviets would do it, or the way Russian intelligence would do it, is they don't say this is a bribe. What they say is they go to a journalist and they say, would you like to make an agreement with us that you're going to help us in our battle against corruption? And if you agree to help us in our battle against corruption, then we'll pay you this amount for a consulting fee every year. But it's like, the real thing that the journalist is supposed to do is to only write positive articles about the EBRD and never write negative articles about them. But truthfully, this is one of the things they do. And I mean, this is like a thing we try to capture in the book also, and I think we successfully did this. The Russians do this stuff all the time, and it seems like they fool the Westerners most of the time as well, because there's all sorts of organizations in the West. I mean, these think tanks in Washington and these, I don't know, different charity organizations or development organizations, and they all have beautiful names that they're all, trying to make equality and democracy and all this. But they're front organizations, and they have an agenda which is not the same as what they say. In fact, it's exactly the opposite of what they say. I even had a discussion with a friend recently about how the EBRD recently talks a lot about climate change and talks a lot about wind power, wind turbines, and about how they want to fund all these wind turbines everywhere. But this is a popular one as well for organized crime, because the organized crime people, some of them are clever, and then what they figure is that, well, if they rip off their government and they do it through a wind power project, then a lot of people are sympathetic to the wind power projects. A lot of people say, oh, but wind power is like so important for the future and for the environment, and that therefore, I mean, we had this in Malta, of course, with this Enna Malta Montenegro thing, where I think about 30% of the budget went to the actual wind farm and 70% got stolen. But this is, the kind of stuff they target, and the EBRD is all over that. They're always talking about wind power. In fact, there's so many red flags about the EBRD. It is, again, shocking that nobody catches them and everybody lets this continue year after year. I think it's partly because they always report huge profits. So the countries which are shareholders have a false feeling that they're making profits from this, although really I'm sure the whole thing is going to collapse at some point. They're going to learn that they lost all their money. But if you look at the EBRD annual reports, if it's not about wind power, it's about like empowering women in poor countries in Central Asia, or about making small loans to business people in Azerbaijan or Belarus or someplace. I mean, they have a huge amount of investments in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Kazakhstan. I think most of these investments are not going to get paid back and actually written off. And the EBRD does have a balance sheet, and it does have an auditor. And, if they have assets in Belarus, what's the chance that Belarus is going to pay them back one penny? I mean, Belarus for sure is going to pay them nothing. Russia for sure is also going to pay them nothing. Some of these other countries like Ukraine maybe wants to pay them back, but probably can't anyway, because they're going to be, they're deeply in debt, and there's no way that they can pay anything back, even if they want to. But such assets at a bank are supposed to be written off, and but somehow they're not. And the EBRD keeps reporting these huge profits every year, and even now they're saying about how they're going to expand all of their lending and everything. I would think an honest report from the EBRD during this wartime would be that they're bankrupt, that they made all these loans in all these countries which are tied up in the war in different ways, and they're all have collapsing economies, and they're not going to pay back anything, and that therefore the EBRD has to write off half its assets, and therefore the EBRD is insolvent. But they don't say that. I mean, they make it sound like they're making huge profits like all the time. And it's a red flag. I mean, a normal commercial bank does not make profits every year. A normal commercial banks quite often lose money, or anyway, they're not as profitable as the EBRD is. And how, if it was really so profitable to like make loans to small farmers in Kazakhstan, if it was really so profitable that you'd make billions of euros of profit from this, then the normal commercial banks would be doing it. But I think the reality is it's impossible to make a lot of money doing this, and that they're just exaggerating everything. And the real deals where they really make fat profits, like this one where Latvia secretly paid them to pretend to buy this insolvent bank, in that thing, they could have made a 100% or 200% profit. But the problem is that it's illegal, and they could theoretically get sued. I mean, if Latvia would change its government, for example, the new government could sue the EBRD for ripping off Latvia in that deal, because Latvia lost a lot of money from that. And so far it hasn't, because the same government that the EBRD supports in Latvia is still in power today. So the guys who are running Latvia today are the same ones who made the fraud with the EBRD. But in some of these countries, eventually there's going to be a change of government, and the new government is going to find out that they have all sorts of secret obligations they're supposed to pay to the EBRD, and their national debt is higher than what they're reporting it to be. And the new government's going to say, no, we're not going to pay them, that this is fraud, and this is, was designed to cheat the taxpayers and cheat the creditors, and therefore we're not going to pay them back. But how it survives for such a long period of time is really amazing, and it is doomed to crash.
Very interesting insight
about. And
about.
In fact, even going to the war. I mean, there's worse things, which is about, I mean, that's just about financial fraud, but about the actual war, something that we put into the book, and this was in the real story, is this circle of bankers. It wasn't just one bank. They're like a family of banks. There's several banks involved in this. They did steal all the money from the Latvian banking system. They stole all the money from the Moldovan banking system. And they stole all the money from the Ukrainian National Treasury with the previous leader, Yanukovych. They helped him to basically empty out the entire National Treasury. All of these things had connections with Moscow. It really seemed like a purposeful strategy by Moscow to soften up these countries, Ukraine, Moldova, and Latvia. And, perhaps the reason why they want to soften up these countries is because they want to invade all of them. And they invaded one of those countries already, and they might invade the other two as well later on. But we actually, this is the plot of the book, and this is what's really happening in real life. So I think that we've hit upon something here, and the whole the development bank and all the disinformation and stuff. I mean, it makes fun reading also for a thriller that things are going on that people don't really understand what's going on, but there's a lot of lying and cheating and tricks, and they all result in some kind of a disaster. But it is going on in the real story, and I think we captured it in the book as well.
John, all of this is, of course, very overwhelming to a financial observer, because these things are happening very fast. Suddenly, we first had this large network of Russian money coming into Europe, compromising institutions, corrupting many people, literally controlling institutions like Parex Bank, later on ABLV. Now we are discussing about connections of the EBRD and its investments in Russia. So then we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Europe starts gradually and slowly initiating sanctions. And EU states have been obliged, and some of them even did proactively, to pursue assets of sanctioned Russian individuals and Russian entities. And so far, the EU has claimed there's around, if I'm not correct, but I will look it up and write it, but there's around 30 billion of euros in Russian assets seized. And Latvia reported last year that they seized around 55 million of euros in Russian assets stored in Latvian banks. Malta has declared that it has seized only around 300,000 euros of Russian assets, which of course looks very small compared to the millions seized in other countries. And apparently it's only Greece and Malta which had such a low figure. Now, of course, I would like to ask you about Latvia and what do you think that Latvia is doing in this regard today? But I want to first ask you about Malta. First of all, do you think it is realistic, the figure that the government has given to the European Union, that Malta has found only around 300,000 euros worth of Russian assets owned by sanctioned individuals and entities?
Well, how many Russians have purchased citizenship in Malta? It's more than 1,000. It's probably 2,000 Russians probably have purchased citizenship. And right there, you know, all of them have more than 1 million invested here. So, and I would think that a lot of them would be connected with the Putin regime. So that's some money right there. There were a few things in Malta which raised my eyebrows. That one thing, okay, so me as a whistleblower in Latvia, you know, my enemies in Latvia, if you would talk to somebody in Latvia who's like going with the government line, which is that Parex Bank was not looted and my whistleblowing was fake, then you might ask them, well, why would John make a fake whistleblowing? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, so you're saying that he just made up everything and that nothing really happened at Parex Bank and he just wrote down a completely fake list of frauds and that this was his whistleblowing. Like, why would somebody do that if it's not true? Sometimes the criticism that comes to me is that they'll say, well, that's because John secretly works for Vladimir Putin and he's like trying to meddle with our democracy, and that's why he made this fake whistleblowing. There was something very similar that happened in Malta with Maria Efimova, where Joe Muscat, I believe, in a speech said approximately the same thing, that somebody asked him, well, why would she make up a fake whistleblowing? It seems like it doesn't make any sense why she would just make up fake information and do a whistleblowing. Like, why would that even be logical or rational for her to do that? And his response was that maybe she's working for Vladimir Putin and maybe she's trying to undermine the democracy of Malta. And I thought that's the same thing that my enemies would say about me in Latvia. And no, I think this is incredible. This is cruel behavior to, you know, accuse somebody who's trying to do an honest whistleblowing. And maybe her whistleblowing wasn't perfect because maybe she didn't collect enough information. Maybe my whistleblowing wasn't perfect and maybe I could have collected more information. I mean, I thought I had enough information, but maybe some people say that I should have collected even more, or that she also should have collected even more. But even so, you know, you try to do a good, honest thing, and then you get accused that, you know, you're working for Vladimir Putin. This is really cruel to do to anybody. That was one thing. I mean, another thing that was really shocking in Malta is when this licensed financial company Ex Ante was caught by the American SEC involved in a big scam on the New York Stock Exchange, that somehow nobody was prosecuted. There was no fine. They didn't lose their license. What actually happened is the government of Malta gave citizenship to the Russian guy who is the main owner of the company. So this seems quite backwards, in my opinion. I mean, they got caught involved in a huge fraud. I mean, there's supposed to be a punishment for that, like at least a fine or a penalty, or better would be to lose their license, or even better that individual people will get prosecuted who are responsible. But this totally opposite reaction of not punishing them at all and instead giving the owner the citizenship seems totally insane to me. And about the total amount of Russian money that could be confiscated in Malta, or that should be because it's connected to oligarchs, I mean, I don't know how much that would be. I will say something that all of Europe has really screwed up that's come out in a couple articles this week is I noticed that one thing Europe focused on right in the beginning of the war was to seize some super yachts. Because I guess, a lot of people, ordinary people who don't really think about accounting and finance so much, a very visible thing to them is that these oligarchs have these gigantic super yachts that are super expensive. So Europe did seize a bunch of those, but apparently 3 of them have been stolen back again, which again makes me wonder if law enforcement is doing anything at all in Europe. But there was 1 held in Croatia and 2 held in Italy, where those 3 super yachts, while they were arrested, they were seized by the police and arrested, that the oligarchs managed to sail away with all 3 of them and bring them to Turkey or to someplace else, and they got the yachts back again. I mean, how incompetent can the European law enforcement be? I mean, I would think that if they arrest a super yacht, they should be able to disable it. I mean, it shouldn't be like the oligarch can just jump on board and sail away. They should be more serious about this. Or even the fact that nobody is arrested. I mean, this is not just during the wars, during the entire, post-Soviet Union period. It's been 32 years. In 32 years, the number of oligarchs that Europe and America have put in prison is this many. It's 0. Like, none of them are in prison. These guys they're murderers and thieves. They're billionaires. And their crimes are in the headlines of the newspapers. Everybody knows who they are. But somehow in 32 years, they can't put 1 in jail. I mean, this is absolutely incredible. So, I mean, what's going on with law enforcement? I mean, the United States as well hasn't put anybody in jail. The people who get sanctioned, it doesn't even seem like they're suffering very much. I mean, the people who are sanctioned still seem to be very rich anyway. Yeah, it's like, why can't they do anything in 32 years? It's like absolutely incredible. I mean, this is not all Malta's fault. I mean, maybe partly because Malta could have done something. But then with Malta, I mean, the thing that I wanted to emphasize today is certain things that Malta could do and certain ways in which Malta is adversely affected by this. The EBRD, so Malta is a shareholder in the EBRD. That's an optional thing. I mean, the EBRD goes around to different countries and asks them if they would like to be an investor, and then you can say yes or no. And some countries are investors and some countries are not investors. Malta could very easily just send a letter to the EBRD and say that we don't want to be an investor anymore. And they don't even have to, Malta doesn't even have to give any reason for that. They don't have to mention Vladimir Putin in the letter. They can just say that Malta has some investment priorities, and our investment priorities are different now, and we decided that we don't want to be an investor in the EBRD anymore. I mean, I think that that would be a very reasonable thing to do. I mean, to get out of it. Another thing is the integrity of the entire euro. Eurostat, which is the European Commission's arm for statistics. One of the statistics they're responsible for are the national debts of the countries. So the countries are all supposed to report what their national debt is, and that's relevant for bond investors because bond investors want to know how indebted a country is before they consider buying bonds from that country. Those numbers are supposed to be true. The national debt figures of all of the EU countries are supposed to be true, and it's the responsibility of Eurostat. But I have a letter exchange from Eurostat that essentially they knew that Latvia falsified its national debt to bail out Parex in this fraudulent way where they secretly paid the EBRD to pretend to buy part of it. This materially changed the national debt of Latvia. It actually helped them to get into the Eurozone, even though they didn't really qualify. And then on top of that, the biggest investor in Latvian bonds is the European Central Bank. Now, these people apparently all know what's going on, and they just have a mentality that just doesn't make any sense. And you can go like a little bit back in history to Greece, where when Greece entered the Eurozone, they were giving false information about their national European Central Bank, and the European Central Bank knew that they were giving false information to them, and the European Central Bank supported them anyway. It's like they have some kind of a mentality there that they feel like they're helping. Like, okay, well, Greece didn't really qualify, but we're going to help them out by, going along with their fake accounting and pretending like their debt is smaller than it really is. But they didn't really help Greece by doing that. I mean, Greece had, huge riots and the whole economy collapsed because of this. And I would think that they would learn something from this, that helping a country to falsify its national debt is not really helping that country. But at Eurostat and at the European Central Bank, they seem to have this mentality. And this is something where Malta has influence. I mean, these are European institutions, and Malta can say to Eurostat, that, listen, the national debts of the countries should be true. They shouldn't be falsified. And tell the European Central Bank that, listen, if a country is falsifying its national debt, you should not buy bonds from that country. The countries are supposed to have true national debts, and then you can buy the bonds. But to do it this other way, where the European Central Bank makes all these rules, like what debt levels different countries are supposed to have, to make these rules, but then to knowingly allow the countries to break the rules. Like, what's the point of that? I mean, they might as well just not make the rules in the first place. But Malta for sure can do something with that. And I've tried to contact institutions in many countries, including in Malta. The Central Bank of Malta doesn't respond to anything. The FIAU in Malta doesn't respond to anything. The MFSA in Malta does not respond to anything. Individual people who represent Malta in Brussels, they don't respond to anything. I cannot find anybody in Malta who will respond. And it's like they all want to maybe keep this, what they call it, plausible deniability, where they can, eventually when the whole thing blows up, they can pretend like they didn't know about it. But right now, Clyde Caruana, who is the Minister of Finance, is sitting on the Board of Governors of the EBRD. He could raise a question when the Board of Governors has a meeting. He could say, well, there is evidence, very clear evidence, that the EBRD has made fake investments into banks, and that these banks had been looted, and these banks were even connected to Putin. So why did the EBRD do this? Since the mission of the EBRD is supposed to be to foster transparency and democracy, that this seems to go exactly opposite to the mission. But nobody will talk about it. So the Board of Governors meets and nobody says a word, and then they hear all sorts of fairy tales about how the EBRD is, making the clean energy and helping all the poor farmers and so forth. And they just go along with it. And I guess they just don't want to really know what's going on because it's too much trouble for them or something. But no, it's like nobody is doing anything. And I can't even blame just one party. I mean, it's the laborists and it's the nationalists as well. They, like everybody, ignores this.
I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, but our time is quickly running out. It was very interesting once again, and very also surprising, with some of more shocking than surprising, I would rather say, with the stories that you have. So thank you again, John. Anyone who can read more about these stories can once again check out KGB Banker, now available at Agenda bookstores and also my website. And thank you, John, for showing us the book. Thank you again for being here, and hopefully we'll have another chance another time to speak again.